Hey everybody! Finally, this is my friend Jala, who collects death photos, and as you can see, she doesn't look like a serial killer. But then again, Ted Bundy did look charming too, I understand. So, let's get right to it. How did they originate? What are death photos?
Okay, death photos were mostly taken in the Victorian era when photographs were really expensive. It was like the dawning age of photographs. Mm-hmm. You had a lot of things like daguerreotypes and tintypes. They were costly because the original first photographs were taken on silver plates, which was expensive. Right. So they were rarely taken. And a death photo might be the last way to remember that person. It was when paintings had fell out of vogue. Photos were all the new rage. You had a person die, you weren't able to have any mementos or photos of them before they passed.
Gotcha.
So this was your way to remember them. And a lot of times they were put on cards that would memorialize the person. Mm-hmm. These heavy cardstock, they were usually matte black or matte white with gold lettering. They would have depictions of lilies and things like that. And sometimes it would also be the only way a family portrait would be taken.
Okay, I get it.
So you get the whole family there. You would pose the dead person to look as lively as possible.
As lively as possible.
You would all sit very still for the photo to be taken because these were really long exposure cameras. Right. And one of the coolest artistic parts about those long exposure cameras is that you have to stay perfectly still for them. So a lot of people, like, you get those photos of people who aren't smiling, right, because they would have to hold that smile sometimes for 30 minutes.
Oh, so they weren't all unhappy.
The most interesting thing about the long exposure cameras was because the dead people were exceptionally still. They would be in perfect sharp focus. Whereas the living would actually be slightly blurry because you can't help but move a little bit on a 30-minute period.
You're right.
So they would be even more beautifully artistic because the person that you would be highlighting in the photo, the dead person, would be perfectly in focus and everybody else would be in soft focus.
It's almost haunting.
It is haunting.
You know, I read a little bit, trying to know a little something before we did it, and I was always under the impression that it started, I'd heard that, a lot of morticians would carry around their work to showcase it. Mm-hmm. So I naturally thought that's where it originated. And when I first discovered as you said, the Victorian age, I thought, wow, well, why weren't they doing that before pictures when they were painting? And I guess it's because
they actually do some death paintings, but what would most likely happen in a death painting is they would come visit the body during the viewing, and the artist would make sketches and things like that. Then they would go back and make a live portrait of this person.
As lively as possible.
So they would be posed with their cat or their dog or outside working or something like that. You don't even realize those were death portraits because they don't look like death portraits.
Well, I mean, and guys, you have to realize that this is not uncommon. They did, the face. It was very common, especially for famous people to. In fact, here in Mobile, we have one of, I think, 3 Napoleon's death masks.
Yes.
It was very common for posterity's sake to capture somebody's face. So, obviously, that wasn't a dark thing, but so. I guess that brings us around to where did it cross into, just a natural social thing to collection? How did you start collecting it?
I started collecting them because I've always been, I would say, not apprehensive about death like the majority of people are. The majority of people will see a dead body or hear about a dead body and they'll shirk and they'll be, saddened by it, but it's a natural part of life. Sure. It's going to happen to everyone. And if you can look in the art of these, they're amazingly artistic. The way they're posed, it's crazy how lifelike they can make them. And they actually would edit them in post sometimes. Right. So they would add blush to the cheeks. It's kind of hard to keep the eyes open, so a lot of times they would actually paint eyes onto the photo.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
To make them more lively.
I know that they use Abraham Lincoln a lot when they talk about, first doing embalming, and they could, tour him around for so. If someone was a motorcycle rider, their will may say, I want to be on a motorcycle.
That had to be an expensive burial.
Actually, they just make light of it. I hope I'm able to do that. But
remember, you must die. Well, they're also usually called a Memento Mori photograph. And the photographs weren't the only Memento Moris. A lot of times they would take locks of hair from the deceased and they would braid them and turn them into jewelry. Hair jewelry, Victorian hair jewelry. It's actually pretty popular. And another one would be a Memento Mori ring. So you could have a, much like the poison box rings, but they would contain something like ashes or pinky bone or something like that, and it was the way to keep that person close to your heart and to remember them and to remember your own mortality and celebrate life
as lively as possible.
Because eventually it will come to an end.
And I think now they actually like turn the ashes into diamonds or something.
We can turn them into diamonds and
so it's cool.
Beautiful glass paperweights. And I actually recently read a story about a man who was turning them into pottery and spinning them on a wheel, and that's really neat.
Some people actually pay to go to space, and true story, Hunter S. Thompson was put in a firework. That's what he wanted. Over his land, they shot him up in there and blew him up.
Well, the roundabout value for your general photograph, they can vary a lot. If you get one that is just the deceased by themselves, that's generally about a $30, $50 range, somewhere around in there. It also varies on subject matter. Oddly enough, children... Babies, they go for more money. I'm not really sure why. Beautiful women also go for more money. And the most valuable pieces that you're going to find are obviously going to be celebrities, but you have to be really careful with that because there's a lot of fakes. There's a lot of prints. And they can also vary in price depending on what their frame is. So a lot of your Memento Mori photographs that you'll find on various websites like eBay or something like that are going to be printed on old cardstock. It was a really heavy cardstock. And they were actually given away to friends and family, you know, remember this person. And those are the $30, $40, $50 range. But you can get these ones that come in these beautiful frames that fold out. Because photographs, back in the day, they needed to be protected. Light and things can degrade them. So they would have these fold-out frames where on one side there would be a picture of the deceased, and on the other side there might be a poem or some words from them or something like that. And they could be folded up when they weren't looked at, so it could protect the photo inside. And they'll have these beautiful accoutrements like brass edges with filigree. Velvet was really popular. Yeah, and those go much higher. You're talking about the $150, $300 range, and odd photographs always do it for people. So I remember one that I particularly liked that you can probably Google and find it. It's an entire family in a room. And there was a child that died, and the child is placed on the floor with pillows and blankets. It's a very, beautiful scene, and the family cat is in the picture. And because the cat is there, which is not really popular in Victorian households to have animals in the house, that one went for more money because it was odd. It was showing something that didn't happen in that time.
Yeah. Well, and it occurred to me when I was researching, there's all kinds of different reasons that people collect, obviously. And to me, I think you're collecting because of the history and kind of the uniqueness
and
of
the
why
art.
Humans deal with, how we deal with death. And obviously there are those that, I call it rubbernecking. We all like to watch NASCAR so we can watch the wrecks. Where is your line where you don't collect or something or
So I try to stick to ones that are mostly adults. I did have a couple of children, but I mostly stick to the adults. I prefer the ones that is just the deceased without the family members. They're generally more artistic. They're posed better. They have a lot more touch up, which really adds to the art. The ones that I just draw the line I will not is you get a lot of these execution photos. They're actually becoming more popular, which I can't wrap my brain around, but I get it. But those photos were not taken for the artistic value. They weren't taken to remember or memorialize anybody. They were really more just proof that that person had been, killed. Jesse James, John Dillinger, Mussolini. Rasputin would be the one that everybody knows. If you Google it, if you read a book about him or anything like that, you're going to find at least one of his death photos. But they're just proof that he was dead. They weren't taken for any artistic value. Okay. I'm not into those.
Yeah. So, well, have you ever found yourself, I know you're not ashamed of your collection. You should be. Do you ever find yourself feeling ostracized or, not?
There have been a couple of cases where I people have asked me, what do you collect and things like that. And there are things that I collect that are really normal. I collect skeleton keys. I collect paintings of cats. When I get to the death photos, there have been a few people, oh, why? And I've had a couple of people ask me if it was because I was a goth.
Right.
As you can see, I'm really not. Which I kind of take that with a grain of salt. Some people just don't realize the reason why you would collect them. I think they think that I'm more of the rubbernecker who's going to collect something like a,
right.
a grisly photo, which it's art to me. There's beauty in death.
Yeah. Guys, you have to know, I know Jala a long way. She's definitely not a sicko or any of those things. I guess anything can be abused. I actually, in my opinion, I have a friend that collects clowns, and they worry me more than anybody else because I think of clowns as
like they have them in their house.
Right. I mean,
Looking at them?
everything is covered in clowns, and it's a she, and she lives alone. So I'm like, ooh, But
that's something else.
so I gotta ask you, when your better half Connor, what did he think? I mean, here you're dating this girl, and she likes death photos.
Well, when I first told him about them, he was a little confused about exactly what they were. I think he thought more that they were going to be the, proof of death than famous people. Mm-hmm. And I explained it to him, showed him a couple online and things like that, and he was like, he thought they were cool, but he kind of doesn't really want me to display them in the house. Which is understandable. They're dead people that we don't know.
Right.
I have actually photos of living people who are now, I'm sure, passed away as well. They're not death photos, just examples of old photography. But luckily for him, there are old photos. They have to be protected from the light, so they don't get displayed.
Right.
They get taken out when people want to see them.
So if he comes home from work and he sees a camera out, he may need to worry. Right?
Maybe.
Well, it's funny, and I appreciate you coming in and letting me interview you, and I find it interesting. As you know, I want to learn everything about everybody's collections. I like to understand what makes us tick, and a lot of people are ashamed of their collections. They shouldn't be. If it's doing no harm and it makes them happy, I think it's a good thing. I think collecting is good for everybody. If I die first, and I'm very serious about this, that the coffin will be closed, but the bottom half I'll be wearing clown shoes. Okay. Hopefully, people have a different understanding about why people collect them, or most people do. And if you are interested in finding more out, I'll include at the bottom some links where you can find out more. Be sure to hit the like button or leave a comment. Remember, nothing negative, not because you're going to hurt our feelings, but it's not good for you. All right, thanks. Have a great day, guys.
As lively as possible.